Adding some kind of RGB lighting to your system is one of the quickest and easiest ways to get a nice unique look and really take things to the next level. And these days you can pretty much get any component you want with some kind of RGB lighting on it. But my favorite way to do that is with case fans. The problem with that is it can really add up in terms of cost really quickly. There's some really expensive case fans on the market, and if you start to get a whole bunch of them for the intake and the exhaust on your case, and maybe you also need some for your cooler, you can easily spend $100 or $200 even on some of those high-end models. And that's where these guys come in. These are the Deepcool RF120M high brightness RGB fans. I picked these up on Amazon in a box of 5 for about $50 US, which works out to just $10 a fan, which as far as RGB fans go is actually really affordable. Before we take these out of the box, let's quickly go over some of the specifications. So they're 120 millimeter fans. The RPM range is 500 to 1500. Airflow is 56.5 CFM. Air pressure is 1.66, which is actually pretty good and should make them suitable for heat sinks and radiators if you want to use them for cooling. The fan noise is rated at less than 27 decibels, which is very quiet. Fan connector is 4-pin PWM. They use fluid hydro bearings and a standard 4-pin RGB connector, and they're fully certified with Asus, Gigabyte, MSI, and ASRock RGB lighting control systems. So let's go ahead and open up the box and see what we get here. All right, so we've got this little white box on top. Let's see what's inside here. So right away I can see these two fan hubs that come with it. So you're gonna plug all your fans in here, and that's what provides the PWM connection and the power to spin the fans themselves. RGB would connect separately. So these are a pretty cool way to connect multiple fans in your case and kind of manage the cables. And they come with a little bit of adhesive tape to keep them situated up against your case and out of the way, which is pretty cool. Here's your standard 4-pin 12-volt RGB connector that can connect to any motherboard and that supports RGB and should work perfectly fine with any of those lighting control system softwares that we talked about before. And there's also some individually packaged screws for each of the 5 fans. Next up, we have a little user manual here that kind of shows you what's inside the box, and there's some very basic instructions for how to set these up with the fan controller hubs and then how to chain them together and plug in the RGB onto your motherboard. Very simple stuff. It's just a couple pages here. Shows you what you need to know, nothing more and nothing less. Next, we have just a piece of cardboard that does nothing. And finally, all 5 fans are packed tightly inside the box, so let's go ahead and remove them and see what we get. The fans feel pretty sturdy and well made when you pick them up. They've got a little bit of weight to them, and overall they feel really solid. There's some rubber grommets here over where the installation hardware is going to go to minimize vibration and keep noise down. They feel really solid. I don't feel any play at the connection points to the motors, and when you spin them, there's really nothing to hear at all. Overall, it seems like a pretty well-made fan. Here are the connectors. This is your standard PWM connection that I was talking about, and then this is where you kind of daisy chain together the RGB lighting. You just keep connecting the fans together, and then finally they connect to the RGB cable that was included in the box, and that plugs into the motherboard, and that's what will give you control over the RGB on all of the fans. I'm going to quickly plug these in and get them set up on my system so that we can see what they look like, what they sound like, and generally how they perform. So getting these connected and up and running was as easy as any other case fan. They just plug into those hubs like a normal case fan would into a motherboard, and then the RGB connector is a standard RGB connection. Plug it in and you're good to go. So let's go over to the computer and start messing around with Asus AuraSync to see what the RGB looks like on these fans. So as far as the RGB implementation goes, I think these are pretty awesome. They work flawlessly with Asus AuraSync on my Asus motherboard, and it should be just as good with Gigabyte, ASRock, and MSI because they're all certified compatible. So what you really get here is a super bright, colorful and vibrant RGB fan setup that is probably going to be good enough for all of the RGB and lighting in your system. If you're putting in 5 fans or more, you probably don't need any other lighting strips or effects or anything like that. These are going to satisfy most people. Now, one of the things that I did notice is if you flip the fan over and you take a close look at where the fan is actually spinning around the hub and the motor, you do see it vibrate or wobble a little bit, which does indicate that it's probably off balance a little bit. But like I said, when you're holding it in your hand, at least at the base RPM, you really don't notice anything. It feels perfectly smooth. So I don't think it's going to cause any adverse effects like noise or vibration inside of your system. And some of them are different, like some of them are better than others, but I mean, I think that's to be expected. Overall, this is probably a more budget fan set. So, I mean, there's bound to be some kind of quality issue or something somewhere, but I think it's pretty minor. You don't really notice it, you don't feel it, and I definitely don't hear it. So really quickly here, I'm just gonna crank the fan speed all the way up to the max, which is about 1550 RPM, so that you can hear any audible difference between the base RPM and the maximum, which I think is probably going to be pretty considerable because the base RPM is barely audible at all. So let's go ahead and do that. So there you go. They're actually running at just over 1500 RPM right now, and there's a serious amount of air moving behind these now. And I can definitely hear a difference. But that's true for any fan. I don't think you want to be running anything at its absolute maximum all the time. It's definitely going to add some noise to your system. It's just the way that it is. So that's how these work. They're very quiet on, I had it on smart mode before. It was keeping it around the minimum all the way up to maybe 500 to 700 RPM, barely audible. You crank them up to the max, they're gonna get a little loud, but it's not an annoying loudness. It's not like a mechanical kind of sound. You really just hear a lot of air movement. It sounds like there's like a crazy windstorm going on in here. So, I mean, keep that in mind. If you want to keep the noise levels down, you're going to want to keep the RPM down. Like I said, same is true with any set of fans. So overall, these Deepcool RF120M super bright RGB fans are an awesome deal. At about $50 US for a pack of 5, you really get really good cooling performance, good quality fans. They feel like they're well made and they're probably going to last. And I mean, they're $10 a fan is what it worked out to, at least when I bought them on Amazon. I'm gonna put the purchasing links down in the description. Make sure you check these out if you're looking to take your system to the next level with some cool RGB lighting effects. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, and share, and I'll see you in the next video.